All right, are we live? Okay, we're live. Sorry, I'm 2 minutes late. Look, DeMeco Ryans, an embattled DeMeco Ryans. I would say there's an embattled Bobby Slowick. There's an embattled offensive line. I don't think DeMeco is quite embattled yet, and yet with people like myself and others starting to resoundingly cry for some kind of change at offensive coordinator, some kind of change at the very least in play calling as the Texans face the Jaguars this week with the bye week afterwards. Great time to make decisions about various things like that. We'll take a listen to DeMeco Ryans in his press conference. Thank you to BetUS for sponsoring the video. Here is DeMeco. We'll see if we can hear the questions. Whistle.
Looks like they're getting Trevor Lawrence back. How much does that boost them to have a quarterback that's got his kind of experience back in the lineup?
Question was, the Jags look to be getting Trevor Lawrence back, and he'll play this week. What's your thoughts on Trevor Lawrence?
Yeah, we're excited to go against whoever lines up at quarterback for him. This week really isn't about the Jags. It's all about the Texans. So whoever goes out there really has no bearing on what we're doing. We're just trying to go out and execute, play our brand of football, play the best that we can play. That's it.
Okay, so they're focusing on the Texans. Let's focus on us. Let's get these things right. We're not worried about who we're going to face out there. I'm worried about Trevor Lawrence in the same way that I was worried about Will Levis. Hey, sure, this guy can do some things, but certainly not multiple times, especially with Kadar Holman was sent to IR today. I think maybe one of the under-discussed stories of the year was that we knew going into the season there would be depth issues at cornerback. We were worried about it. It's come to be an issue, and now that even amongst the guys that we weren't really comfortable with on the depth side of things, they're either getting injured or they've been rendered useless. You know, hey, Jeff Okudah's coming back. Jeff Okudah got beat. So focus on the Texans, not the Jaguars. Hopefully, I'm guessing somebody in Jacksonville will take that, hey, we're not worried about who we're going to face, as some kind of slight at Trevor Lawrence, and maybe we'll get some juice ahead of this game.
We've talked this many times about showing your players these mistakes that have happened. How are they receiving that message, and what indication do you have that they're taking it to heart and things can begin to change?
Yeah, guys.
So the question was basically, what indications have you gotten that your players are receiving your message?
Attack this week the right way. They've attacked with the right mindset. Just being out on the practice field today, guys are dialed in, locked in on what we're doing. Like, they're flying around, energy is up. So I'm happy to see just the way we came out to practice today. It's a great indicator of us having a really good week.
If there's one thing I don't worry about with the Texans, it's that there's going to be all of a sudden a lot of guys letting go of the rope or not trying hard, not playing hard, whatever it might be. They'll continue to put – you can rest assured they will continue to put the same version of that offense out there week in and week out, all right? There's no, I don't worry that the Texans are all of a sudden going to stop being a bad offense just because they've stopped paying attention or they're distracted by Thanksgiving. Boy, I gave myself a pep talk before this about positivity. It's not going so hot. Oh, speaking of positivity, BetUS. I have not handicapped this game yet. Lots of reasons to feel optimistic about this team versus the Texans versus the Jaguars. The same way there were reasons to be optimistic about the Texans versus the Titans. I don't think the Jaguars challenge and test the Texans in the same way that the Titans did. For one, the Jags defensive line, their strength is their defensive ends, not their defensive tackles. Whereas the Texans versus the Titans, man, we talked about it all week. Talked about it all day Sunday after the game, before the game. We talked about it Monday, Tuesday. Those defensive tackles were a nightmare for a suspect interior offensive line. So I am feeling better about this in some regards. Over at BetUS, you can get a 150% signing bonus on your first deposit. All the way up to $2,000. You can get 125% bonuses on your second and third deposits. All the way up to $2,000. Great site. Lots of fun prop bets, parlays, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see what the next question is for DeMeco.
A few weeks, you and Bobby both said that you've made some changes. Like Bobby last week, I think, said something like, trust me, like, changes have been made. If you could, what are some of the changes that you guys have made over the last couple of weeks that you kind of hope to see, or that would change something?
Yeah, most of that.
Okay, Bobby said last week that some changes had been made, and I think that was Will Kunkel asking what what are the changes, how have they worked out, whatever. Tell us about these here changes.
It's internal, and for us, it's just, for us to go out and execute. That's what everybody needs to see. Like, we'll make the proper adjustments and things that we need to make, and it just has to show up on Sunday.
All right, okay. Okay, what changes were made? If there was any change, for instance, in maybe the play calling or the decision making, it didn't work out well when the Texans had to take a delay of game because they didn't know whether they were going to go for it or not, and they end up getting a delay of game on a punt. I think there were other things that whatever changes they made, like say the one sack they took when Shaq Mason was pulling and looked very, very tentative as he was kind of like he was doing like kind of like that old man jogging motion towards the perimeter as Ali Gay rocketed towards C.J. Stroud. That wasn't a great change. Another this didn't involve a change, but the penalties. This got me angered all anew because I was thinking about the Devondre Sweat sack. And I thought, man, that was, at the very least, if a 400-pound man is going to make a sack, it was pretty late in the down. And yet you realize, it was late in the down because it was 3rd and long. Why was it 3rd and long? 3rd and 15 plus. Why was it such a long distance to go? Yeah, that's right, because you had 2 straight false starts. You had Laramie Tunsil and then I believe Juice Scruggs that knocked it back to 3rd and forever. So versus a 4-man rush, you've got nothing but deep developing routes because it's 3rd and forever. And yeah, that's how. And then Shaq Mason gets swatted aside by Devondre Sweat like an old can of Budweiser, just crumpled up and tossed aside because all these things culminate and the offensive line commits absurd penalties and does stupid things. But I'm feeling good. I'm feeling positive.
His tenure here, you guys have invested a lot around him. How do you feel you guys have done in that department of building a good team around CJ?
Yeah, we have.
How do you feel about? Let me try to hear that again.
The proper adjustments and things that we need to make, and it just has to show up on Sunday.
While CJ's tenure here, you guys have invested a lot around him. How do you feel you guys have done in that department of building a good team around CJ?
Okay, how do you feel about building a good team? How have you done building a good team around CJ?
A really good team. I don't know where the narrative is going or what it is. We're a really good team when we play well and when we finish, we're a good team. So we have the guys that we need to go out and win games. Yeah, we miss some guys. That's all NFL teams. You're going to miss some guys here or there due to injury and those things. But you keep rolling. You keep battling each and every week, and that's what our guys have done.
Okay. Is it a good team right now? And it's narrative is a loaded word. It should just mean, okay, the story around all of this. It's taken on a negative connotation. Sometimes narratives are accurate. Over the last 6 games, this team has not operated like a good football team. They've done some really good things defensively, but offensively they are operating like a losing football team. And so you meet somewhere in the middle, and it's a mediocre football team for the course of the season, especially when you look at points for, points against, all that. The one word, the buzzword, the other word that's taking on a negative connotation around here that DeMeco used in the previous answer is execution. And I think most of you guys who follow this channel know, hey, when I hear over and over again about players not executing, at some point that falls back on the coaches. So on the offensive side of things, yeah, look, if it were just one position group or if it was just one issue, then I wouldn't necessarily just flat out want to put it all on Bobby Slowick. But it's execution is, okay, the offensive line with their false starts, with their penalties. Okay, the penalties like the 2 men in motion, or even last week, Laramie Tunsil being too far downfield. The attention to detail, missed blocks in pass protection, in the back amongst tight ends and running backs as well. The actual play calling, the operation in terms of, can we use a heart count every now and then? Can we do some things? The Texans use motion a boatload. I'm not sure that they use it effectively. I never really get a feel that they're doing it as effectively to create movement on the defense to diagnose what's coming up. So they use pre-snap motion at a pretty good rate compared to other teams around the league, and yet I feel like they get the least out of it compared to the teams that are really effective at it. So execution's starting to turn into a negative buzzword for me. If they're not executing, it's on Bobby Slowick. There's too many people not executing left, right, up, down, all over the place.
Difficult do you think it is for opposing quarterbacks to deal with the pass rushing duo of Anderson and Hunter when you have them both in there?
Question about Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter, who now are both in the top 5 for sacks in the league. Danielle Hunter is second in the league for sacks. I believe he's 1 sack behind Trey Hendrickson, and Will Anderson is 5th in the league despite missing a couple games. He wasn't at practice today, but he was out standing up doing the Thanksgiving stuff, giving back to the kids yesterday, where he looked every bit like the best uncle who ever lived. I would imagine Will Anderson is a really, really good uncle to his nieces and nephews.
Well, they raise havoc. So I think it is really hard on opposing quarterbacks, and we see that in how teams try to protect versus us with the chips and trying to slow our guys down. So that just shows how much respect that they have when the coordinators are preparing. They have to make sure they block the edges and keep the edges blocked, and our guys are still doing a great job of finding a way to get pressure on the quarterback and get him down.
My biggest concern right now about the defense is everything that popped up against the Titans. Look, you got a great pass rush. Awesome. The 8 sacks, just tear off on them. Chris Long had a really good joke, maybe partly true, was that the Texans might be the perfect team for Will Levis to play because the Texans are going to sack him before he can make a stupid mistake. You know, if the Texans had just gotten to him faster before he threw that pick 6, they could have rescued him from throwing that pick 6. So good point by Chris Long. I'm growing steadily. My admiration for him is growing steadily, and yet there's a hint of jealousy there because I think he's better at a lot of the stuff that I like to think I'm good at. I think he's better at. So I got to figure out how I feel about Chris Long. He might be too good for me to like. But as far as the defense goes, the safeties are going to be an issue. Jimmy Ward's going to go down and play slot corner. He's taken over for Jalen Petre's role. I think he's been good in that role in the past. We're going to have the same concerns about him that we had with Jalen Petre, which is, hey, if he's lined up, and he's supposed to man up a guy like Devontae Adams or something with no safety help over the top, it could get dicey. But because he's coming up and playing in the slot, you've got Eric Murray out there a lot more. You've got more defensive backs in the backfield when you're playing dime that you might not trust or feel good about, and that's been the weak spot. You're getting a great pass rush up front, but you got guys on the back end missing tackles or biting on double moves, whatever it might be. They've got to clean that up, and go back to the execution part of it. All right, that's on DeMeco to clean that stuff up. You can't keep making these mental errors in the secondary and expect to beat the good teams in the playoffs, regardless of what happens with the offense.
The physical aspect of execution is one thing. The mental side, how do you guard against this snowballing mentally and just having this mental thought that we can't do this when it may not be the case?
Yeah.
How do you keep it from snowballing mentally into maybe a point? I believe what he was saying is if it gets to the point where you feel like we can't do this instead of we can do this.
For our mindset, it's, once you line up, you have to first and foremost believe in yourself and believe in why you're in the NFL as a player. You have to have that confidence that you can go out and make any play possible. That's why you're here. You're one of the best in the world at playing football. So you just operate that way, not with a high confidence or a sense of pride about yourself. You do it in a humble way. You just go out and execute to the best of your ability, but you have to have some confidence. You have to have some swagger every time you step onto the field, and our guys have that confidence and swagger about them.
That's cool. Their confidence isn't blown. I was watching, Sean and I talked about this morning. I was watching Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And for those of you who've seen that movie, Leonardo DiCaprio plays an actor who's kind of at the tail end of his TV career in 1969, and they're casting him as the villain on all these pilot episodes and what have you, guest episodes. And he's kind of having a crisis, and he gets to this scene where because he's hungover, he forgets his line in a scene. And he goes back to his trailer and he just tears into himself, just like he's staring in the mirror saying, you're worthless, you're garbage, you got to be better than this, you idiot, all this stuff. And then he studies his lines, he rebounds from it, and he goes out and he gives out one of the best performances he's ever had because he hated himself for a little bit. So, sometimes I'm not trying to be grumpy old man here who's like grousing about the self-esteem movement or anything. There is a little bit of, just a little smidgen of self-hatred every now and then that can be healthy. And, DeMeco after this week said it was going to be tough to flush this one, that he wants guys to feel bad about it. I think you do, particularly maybe with the offensive line. You got some high-paid guys out there that maybe just like it's not tipping it right over the edge in terms of the way you're supposed to play football, given what your contract is. I didn't like Titus Howard after CJ took that safety. Look, yes, CJ theoretically, yes, should have stepped up in the pocket. He did take off to the right and was pushed out of bounds as he was stepping out, like by a few millimeters. The problem is that Titus Howard was getting destroyed on that. And CJ's at a point where I think backed up in the end zone there. Yes, he should have stepped up, but Titus Howard was getting destroyed, and the guy could have gone left and he could have gone right. Titus was just on skates. And then when CJ is down on the ground in the end zone, you look at Titus, and Titus is going like this. And the way I read it, and maybe this is unfair, the way I read it was Titus saying, "Why'd you do that? Why didn't you step up in the pocket?" I was he wasn't pushing him around the pocket, though. He was getting driven back straight towards C.J. Stroud. I mean, so does he even feel bad about that part of it? Does he understand or recognize that he was having a horrible rep? That he was having his manhood snatched from him? But because CJ didn't react perfectly in a circumstance where he was feeling pressure, which he's felt more than just about any. I'm frustrated. Positivity.
Trying to get your team back on the track and winning games. Is there any situations in your past, whether as a coach or a player, that you leaned on to kind of help inform how you've gone about approaching it with your team?
So is there a situation from your past that you've leaned on in kind of talking to your team now, keeping their confidence, et cetera?
No, everything for me is just organic with our team, and I have a good pulse of our team and where we are and what we need, and I make sure I lead in that manner.
I just wanted a story out of that. Come on, DeMeco. This is the opportunity where you can tell a story. Sometimes I tell this to players. Sometimes you don't realize how easily placated the media and fans are with just a good story. Just something. Let me see the human side of you and remember, like, oh yeah, that time in Philadelphia or that time with Houston back when Richard Smith was. I was a young player and Richard Smith was my defensive coordinator. I know what it's like to have Bobby Slowick out here. Something like that.
Is there any extra importance?
Yeah, boy, if he ever took a shot at Richard Smith, which I don't think he would. I think he probably likes Richard Smith. Not a fan.
Getting out of this current funk, heading into the bye, is there any extra importance on this game?
Is there any extra importance on this Jaguars game in terms of getting out of a funk before the bye week?
It's important. It's our next game. I don't know how you put extra importance on any game. Every game is important. That doesn't change. Every time I step in front of our team, every game is important. It doesn't change just, because we lost now it's more important. Well, when we win, they're just as important as well. Every game matters, and you want to, of course, win as many as you possibly can by going out and playing the game the right way.
I guess my question would be, does the outcome of the Jaguars game have anything to do with what they discuss during the bye week when it comes to potential coaching changes? I wonder if a lot of people out there are feeling like, okay, if they trounce the Jaguars, it doesn't necessarily tell you all that much unless it's with some kind of rushing performance that's out of this world or something. And the Jaguars have a really bad pass defense. Their run defense is, I think, about middle of the pack. I'll fact check myself on that later when we do the preview. But that's the one thing that they've really demonstrated that they're not ready for primetime action is the three genuinely good run defenses they faced this year were the Vikings, the Lions, and the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee Titans were a much better run defense than a lot of the conventional stats or otherwise might show. That was a solid run defense with stud defensive tackles. They've been atrocious in the run game against all three of those opponents. Now, one game against the Vikings, they didn't have Joe Mixon, but versus the Lions, versus the Titans, you're looking at 2 yards per carry out of Joe Mixon. The 100-plus yard performances out of Joe Mixon have been mostly about Joe Mixon more so than the offensive line. I might take something positive out of a Jaguars game if the Texans can run the ball effectively versus them, even though they're not as good a defense as those other teams we just talked about. But I would worry that a really good performance against a struggling football team somehow alters or skews or makes them feel like, oh, yeah, you know what? All these issues we've been having in offense for the past 6 weeks, I think we fixed it. We righted the ship. Everything's A-okay. I would worry that would be their response. I would prefer that they go into next week's meeting with a mindset of however they feel about it right now. And I think some of that's going to have to be Nick Caserio as the emotionally detached GM. That's how GMs are supposed to be. Talking to DeMeco Ryans about, okay, at the very least, how can we help Bobby? And I'm guessing they've had those conversations. Or B, do we have a better option? Do we have a better choice? Is somebody on this staff like Gerard Johnson or Bill Lazor or whomever else going to be better equipped to actually handle this operation right now? I'm very skeptical that they would make that move. And yet, if they do it, I will wholeheartedly say, listen, no matter what happens after this point, I stand by that decision. And there you have it, because you spent in the offseason like you were ready for this team to compete hardcore. And nobody from the Texans organization ever said we're going to win a Super Bowl or anything, but they certainly expected to be better than they've been. And it's not working out that way. So you gotta scrutinize everything.
You said with Mark and John the other day that this Titans one stung a little bit more, and usually you move on and it stung a little bit more. Why did that one sting a little bit more than maybe previous ones?
I'm guessing you guys could hear that. Good job, Landry Locker.
Yeah, that game for me, our game last week was, as I talked about for a couple of days now, that it's the mistakes that we made. Everything was about us, and that's solely on us, and the mistakes that we made is why we didn't win that game.
Nah, okay, see, I disagree. Because it wasn't, defensively, yes. You got your butts whooped offensively. Like, those guys physically got destroyed to an embarrassing degree. Just like after the Lions game in the run game, they'd gotten destroyed. It looked like full-grown men versus children. And and maybe that's the answer they come to. Maybe Nick says, you know what, I misjudged exactly. For one, obviously, why did we hire an offensive line coach who's got no familiarity with this scheme? And I've told you guys before, it's more than just knowing understanding the plays with this scheme. The actual technique involved in zone blocking, there's so much that goes into the handwork, how you pivot your hips, all these things. I see none of it from these guys. I don't even see it from, I see better technique on the zone runs from teams that aren't predominantly zone running football teams. So there's that. Then it comes down to the even individual players themselves. And is it Nick saying, all right, yeah, we screwed up with some of this and we got to figure out a way in the offseason, but there's not that much you can do about it right now. And as a few of our listeners to the morning show have pointed out time and time again, I was kind of cool with them not giving Jarrett Patterson a real shot at competing for a starting job during training camp. That was the dumbest take I've had all year. Like the fact that Kenyon Green was basically, I don't want to say he was given the job at left guard, but he really didn't have to compete for it. Jarrett Patterson never had a fighting chance to win that job. That was poor in hindsight.
Phelan ever went down, the defense might have to play a little bit different just because of his unique skill set. Do you kind of agree with that sentiment that Phelan's, a unique player and it's not about replacing him, but playing to your player's strengths?
So the question was the difficulty of replacing Jalen Petrie.
Jalen is a very unique player. Jalen did a lot for us defensively, and again, we'll deploy our guys however we need to put them out there. So it doesn't change everything that we'll do. But you miss the dynamic playmaking ability that Jalen had because he was just such an impactful player.
I do think, remember, it's funny, I guess it's kind of ironic. One of the issues that Jimmy Ward had when he was in San Francisco was he didn't like being thrust into that slot corner role the last year he was there. And when he explained it later, it was because he was coming off of injury and he hadn't taken any reps at corner, even though he had asked for them during training camp and everything. So he felt like he was kind of thrust into it. And I believe the first game he came back was against the Chiefs. So they throw him out there versus the Chiefs, and it didn't go so hot. Didn't go so hot for him. This is different, and there's a clear necessity here, and I think Jimmy Ward has fully embraced it. I think he's going to do a pretty good job at it. Now, is he athletically the same guy that Jimmy Ward is now? No, but he's got a savvy about him, and in that role, the way they've been using Jalen Petrie, I think there will be some instances where maybe Jimmy Ward's veteran savvy and his experience might be better in certain circumstances. So he can't do everything that Jalen Petrie can do physically, but in terms of anticipating plays, understanding where their danger is, all that, I'm not overly distraught about that. I'm more worried about the fact that it sucks personnel away from the actual safety position.
Sunday from your team that you can take into the bye week?
Something about a lesson that you can take into the bye week.
For me, I just want to see everything is about Sunday, right? And what I want to see our guys do is just go out and play clean football, eliminate the negative plays that are self-inflicted. And if we do that, that's all I want to see. That gives us a chance to truly compete and see where we are. Too many times in games that haven't gone our way, it's been solely because of us and things that we can control. So my message to our guys is just strictly intensely focus on the things that you can control. And when we do that and we get out of our own way, then we can fully focus on the opponent and focus on beating the opponent as opposed to beating ourselves.
The biggest thing that I worry about with all of that thing, everything that he just said, is that the penalties have reared their ugly head again. Like the self-inflicted wounds seem to have gotten worse again. And the tentativeness by the offensive line, and I look at Shaq Mason. Shaq Mason's not physically the same guy he used to be, but there's times where he looks tentative when he's pulling. I don't know, maybe that's just because he knows that, man, I don't move like I used to. Or that because of whatever changes they've made or however they're handling the scheme, that there's a tentativeness there. And it's really hard to go out and play tough physical football versus good defensive lines when you're tentative. And again, execution, right? Comes back to coaching. When smart players do stupid things, when previously smart players look like they don't know what's going on, that's where I worry about what is the message, what's being coached, why is it not being translated onto the field? And that rolls back to the coaching.
Every team has the holiday this week. How do you balance letting the guys have the time with their family, which you want, but also, kind of give them advice? Don't eat too much. Make sure that you're not sluggish on Friday, ready for Sunday, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so good job. Aaron Wilson lightens it up a little bit, asks about how do you prepare your guys to handle the adversity of Thanksgiving? Don't eat too much. Family distraction is all of that. Also, could somebody please put some WD-40 on that damn squeaky door? Kind of operation we run in here?
For us, I told our guys it's really no holiday for us. It's a normal week for us. Of course, we'll give them time to eat. Not too much, as Aaron says, but we'll give them that time with their families. But our focus is on the game, right? And that's where it has to be. And that's, if you focus too much on the holiday and Thanksgiving, then that sets you back and you're not prepared and ready to go on Sunday.
Let's give them something to be thankful about. Yeah, that's what you should say. They'll learn their Thanksgiving when they do something that we should be thankful for. That's how you win the masses over. Damn it, DeMeco. Who are we worried about? Who are we worried about overindulging on Thanksgiving? I think the right side of the offensive line. I think Shaq Mason and Laramie Tunsil showed up this year looking damn happy. Titus doesn't move the way he used to move. So I worry about them. So don't worry. If there's one area of the offense, or if there's one area of the team that might be affected by Thanksgiving, it's the worst area of the team.
Hang on a second. Talking about being able
Kim just told somebody to hang on a second.
to balance. I'm just saying, you had a few. Being able to, how do you balance the, being positive, moving forward, with also the accountability that you as a head coach, we may not see that you have to have. How do you balance that? What's that like?
Yeah, I mean, that's just my nature. That's who I am. Like, that's part of the job. And I balance it just by making sure every day is a new day for me. And I attack it with a positive mindset, positive outlook, making sure our guys are encouraged and upbeat with everything that we do. A lot of times when you lose a game or something doesn't go your way, you would think that the sky is falling, like, and everything is just doom and gloom because you lost the game, and everybody has the answers on what you should be doing or what changes you need to make, and that's what we do. I mean, in the NFL, you're gonna lose some games. Of course, you don't want to lose; it happens, but that doesn't just zap all of our energy and zap like what we're truly made of and who we are as men, as people. Like, we bounce back. It's another day, and it's a blessing to see another day. It's a blessing to get to do what we do for a living, right? And have a positive outlook on everything. Every single week we have a positive outlook on that. And whatever we need to do, we got to be the best team on Sunday, and that's about executing on Sunday.
Okay, so this is the thing.
Plays.
The positive outlook. I know this is how it goes always. The coaches that have positive mindsets, man, when things get rough, it's the first knee-jerk reaction. It's like, DeMeco's got to be more of a bastard. Why was he just start being more of a bastard the way my high school coach was? And then you remember, like, oh, yeah, we went 2-6 my senior year in high school, and that guy was kind of a douchebag. It all depends on whether you got the right kind of guys or not. Because usually what happens is on a team, at any level, if you got the right kind of guys on your team, they already feel bad. Like, they already take accountability. And if anything, I think most coaches in trying to find that balance between coaching hard and being positive and everything like that, I think a lot of times they come down hard on players who already feel bad, and it can be destructive if you've got the right kinds of guys. The problem with this team is that I feel like they have the right kind of guys everywhere except in that offensive line room. It does not have the swarm culture in that offensive line room. And it's a big, bright, glaring issue on this team right now that one of these position groups does not look like the others. So, I don't think DeMeco's positivity, just the same way with Pete Carroll, Tony Dungy, others, it's always going to come up whenever there's struggles that people are going to question their methodology or their mindset. I don't think that's an issue with this football team. I do right now start to wonder and worry, all right, DeMeco, in making his transition from defensive coordinator to actual head coach, full-time head coach, at some point might need to come with stepping away from play calling or being as involved with the defense, because this is a team that needs help on offense. And whatever DeMeco's expertise is offensively, I think it's more critical that he spend time over there right now than it is on the defense. And that's the hard balancing act of it all. So I always find it interesting with Bill Belichick that he was an economics major, because economics is all about allocation of resources, right? Or at least a big part of it. I think Belichick did a masterful job of squeezing as much productivity into a 24-hour day as possible. And a lot of it comes down to, all right, knowing when and where to spend your energy. Your energy is going to be divided. How do you spend that energy? And it's critical right now. I mean, if they just keep humming along doing what they've been doing, they're going to make the playoffs, and then they'll probably get beat pretty soundly in the wild card if they operate the same way they've been operating for the last 6 weeks. So something's got to change, because this it's flat out not getting it done.
Is there a theme amongst those negative plays? Is like maybe it's focus, or it's this situation that we end up getting those negative plays in, or is it just a hodgepodge of different ones that pop up because of a certain reason?
Yeah, negative plays happen. I mean, you talk about technique, you talk about poor eye discipline, you talk about poor decision making with penalties. A lot of maybe it's a lack of focus in certain situations, a lot of different things and different people that make different mistakes, and that doesn't change, right? In football, that's what it is. Like, guys make mistakes all the time. Nobody's perfect, and I make sure our guys know nobody's going to be perfect, right? But it's all about just making progress in the things you can control, like your eye discipline, like decision making, you can control those things. So you control those things, then that sets you up and puts you in position to make a play and to help the team make a play. But when your eyes are off or you're not listening, you missed a call, you missed a check, like those are things that are unacceptable for me.
When it comes to eye discipline, so Eric Murray, that first play, they're in zone. You got to be reading through the quarterback. You know, you're using your peripheral vision a lot. And on a play where it wasn't a blitz, he comes up and jumps hard on a crossing route that turns out to be a double move. There's other instances like that in the secondary. Offensively, when it comes to some of the stupid mistakes, you know, Laramie Tunsil's the only guy I can point to who's been a serial offender for years and years and years. Laramie Tunsil's been one of the most highly penalized guys in the league for going back to ever since he arrived in Houston. So he's the one guy that I wouldn't blame that gross inattention to detail. I wouldn't blame that on Bobby Slowick, but it's one of the problems on your team right now. When it comes to the attention to detail in things like that pre-snap motion, I saw one of you earlier say that Clint Sterner said that when they go in motion, it doesn't look like they're doing it with urgency or committing enough to it to sell whatever they're trying to show. It's kind of like lazy, slow motion. The other thing, the two men in motion at the same time, whether that comes down to, I can't remember who the wide receiver was, or Joe Mixon, when you're using pre-snap motion and it's not having the effect you want, and then it's also causing you penalties, that comes back to Bobby Slowick. All right, you're adding extra complexity to the situation when you're not executing the simple stuff well, and the complex stuff that you're adding doesn't seem to work beyond the first half. So to come back to Bobby Slowick again, do the simple stuff right. Do the simple stuff right. Run the football, and then lo and behold, wow, everything's more effective because you're selling the run on your play action, because you actually look like you know how to run block. But they're not doing any of that. The pre-snap motion isn't working or as effective as they want it to be, and it's adding a complexity that leads to mental errors. They've got to get the basics down. I mean, if you're to get back to the point where you're running a vastly reduced playbook, but at least doing it right, then all of these little things you do, the clever little game plan tweaks and everything, by the second half, defenses are onto them, man. Those linebackers for the Titans, they did not give a damn about or worry one bit about the zone runs hitting on the front side. They were just sitting and slipping blocks out the back door, just waiting for Joe Mixon to come to them. And it all starts with not being able to execute anything properly, and just getting physically whooped.
Nickel roll, he's had some success with.
I shouldn't have done that. I should have edited this down. This is way too much negativity for me. It's helping with my low blood pressure. I've for those of you who've been concerned about, I got my blood pressure so low that it started to be a health concern. So now I'm getting intentionally angry. The Texans are helping me out a lot to try to keep my blood pressure more around the right level for me.
What does he bring when attempting to potentially fill in for Petrie in that role there?
Yeah, Jimmy has played a lot of spots for us. Jimmy is a versatile player. He's played in the back end. He can play all over the back end. So we'll see, where Jimmy lines up on Sunday. And he's been a good playmaker for us, and wherever he lines up, it'll be dynamic, and he'll make some plays. He flies around. He has a swarming mentality. So wherever we put him, that's what he'll do. We
just got to keep with Jimmy. You want to keep the ratio of number of opposing players that he's injured to number of his own teammates that he's injured. We just got to keep that at maybe like a 6-to-1 ratio. If he injures 6 of the opponent for every one that we lose, then I feel as the old Vietnam strategy. There we go. The masses will love that. They'll be super happy. Just don't hit our own guys, Jimmy.
All right, thank you.
Let's see. Yeah, it's true, Colby. My blood pressure, I got it down super low, and then I started passing out and hitting my head all the time, as well as a cascade of other health issues that were. It's a long story. Vasovagal syncope, I think, is what it's called. One of you had another question. Frank, I don't know if you're responding to me or somebody else, but I thought that's what I said. Maybe I transposed those two accidentally. That's what I meant to say is it works in the first half, but not the second half. My blood pressure is probably low. First half OC. Yeah, we had talked about this, bringing out an opener. He needs to be like the Rays. DeMeco, I don't know how much of a baseball fan he is anymore. Maybe we need to talk to him about the Rays and how they'll use opening pitchers. Bobby Slowick can be the first quarter offensive coordinator and then cede control to somebody else who can pay attention to the details and everything else. That's the problem though, the second half stuff right now is that it feels like Bobby Slowick is a whiteboard coach. That man, he can scheme up a lot of the stuff. He's got his playbook, right? He's got his special playbook. Don't let the opposing team, don't let that evil guy from the water boy take his playbook because he's got the super special plays in there. But then after you shoot your wad and use up all the special plays in the first half, everybody's on to you. Thanks, everybody, for bearing with me in my struggles on positivity. Coach Koob had some horrible O-lines and still was a force with that play action. Maybe you could help Bobby unlock some things he's trying to do. You know, the thing about, remember with the Texans, too, when you go back and look at it, it took a long time for that offense to really click. And, you know, obviously the first year there was a David Carr issue amongst others, but you didn't really start to see the offense as it's meant to be for a while. It was a slow burn with Kubiak, but obviously it ended up working out well. And you're right, in a scheme like this, that's the tragedy of it all. This is a scheme that, when executed properly, turns journeyman offensive linemen into Pro Bowlers. And we're seeing the opposite effect. We're looking at two offensive tackles where you're like, they're all right. And I mean, Laramie's really good in pass protection, but the sum total of both of them is like, all right, this isn't what I thought I was going to see. And certainly as run blockers, there's just too many times those guys just are not blocking anybody or getting destroyed or what have you. They're not the same as a Penei Sewell, a Trent Williams, like any number of those guys. They're just not the same. So this scheme that when executed properly, it is like the Karate Kid crane kick. No can defend, but you got to be executing it properly, and they're not doing it right now. So thanks again to BetUS for sponsoring the video. I know a lot of times I say I'm going to do things or I think I'm going to try to do it. I've got that Chris Long podcast all cut up because he made some of the exact same points that I've made. And I think from a defensive lineman's perspective, it's interesting that we're seeing things the same way. So I'll do a quick reaction to that on Thursday morning, the day of Thanksgiving. That's right. No days off. No days.